My partner's work trips turned out to be visits to their other family in another state where they've been living a double life for 2 years. I found the birthday card in her carry-on while looking for my phone charger. It was still sealed in its envelope, addressed in Diana's handwriting to someone named Oliver, age 7. The front showed a cartoon dinosaur holding balloons. Inside, she'd written, "Happy birthday to my special boy. Mommy loves you so much. See you this weekend." My hands went numb. We didn't have kids. Diana had always said she wasn't ready, maybe in a few years. I stood there in our bedroom, holding this card with shaking fingers, trying to make the words mean something other than what they obviously meant. The date on the envelope was from 3 months ago. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Diana texting that her flight to the Portland office had landed safely. She'd call after the client dinner. Portland. She went to Portland every month for work, sometimes twice a month. She was a senior consultant, traveled constantly, except now I was staring at evidence that her trips maybe weren't about work at all. I'd been with Diana for 4 years, married for 2 of them. We met at a friend's wedding where we bonded over how terrible the DJ was and how good the open bar was. She was brilliant, funny, driven, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they mattered. She worked in corporate consulting, the kind that paid absurdly well but demanded brutal hours and constant travel. When we first started dating, she'd warned me about the schedule. "I'm gone a lot," she'd said over our 3rd date. "If that's a deal breaker, I get it." But it wasn't. I had my own career as a software engineer, plenty of hobbies, friends I'd neglected. Her travel seemed manageable, even healthy. We both had independence. By the time we got married, her routine was predictable. Portland twice a month for 3 or 4 days, occasional trips to other cities, but Portland was her main account. She'd been managing that client for 5 years, she said. They loved her, demanded her specifically. I put the birthday card back exactly where I found it, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe Oliver was her nephew? But Diana's brother didn't have kids. Her sister lived in Florida with 2 daughters, both teenagers. I tried to remember if she'd ever mentioned an Oliver, any Oliver, in any context. Nothing. My brain started racing through the past 2 years, looking for cracks in the story I'd accepted as truth. The way she always packed her own bags, never letting me help. How she kept 2 phones, saying one was for work. The fact that she always paid for her own flights through her corporate card, so I never saw the charges. Little things that hadn't mattered before suddenly felt enormous, like watching a magic trick in reverse and seeing all the sleight of hand you'd missed the first time. I spent the next 6 hours in a fugue state of internet stalking. I created a fake Facebook profile, searched for Diana's name plus Portland, plus various combinations of details I knew about her. Nothing suspicious came up. Her social media was sparse, professional, exactly what you'd expect from someone in corporate consulting. Then I tried searching property records for Portland, Oregon. I found 3 Diana merchants. One was 78 years old. One owned a condo downtown. The third, I felt my stomach drop when the address loaded, owned a house in a suburb called Beaverton, purchased 4 years ago. The same week we'd started dating. The listing had sold photos still visible, a charming craftsman-style home with a blue front door, a swing set visible in the backyard. I sat back from my laptop, actually dizzy. This couldn't be real. But I screenshotted everything anyway, my hands moving on autopilot while my brain tried to catch up. Diana called that night at 9, her usual time when she was traveling. "Hey babe, how was your day?" She sounded exactly like herself, warm, slightly tired, affectionate. I almost convinced myself I was insane, that there was some rational explanation. "Fine," I managed. "Boring. How was the client dinner?" She launched into a story about some executive's terrible tie, a waiter who'd spilled wine, the usual work anecdotes. I listened to her voice, trying to detect anything off, any hint of deception. There was nothing. She asked about my day, about the project I was debugging, told me she missed me, said she loved me. After we hung up, I pulled up the screenshots of the Portland house again. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that birthday card. "Mommy loves you so much." At 3 in the morning, I made a decision that would detonate my entire life. I was going to Portland. The flight left at 6 the next morning. I called in sick to work, threw clothes in a backpack, and drove to the airport in a state of controlled panic. Diana thought I was home, assumed I'd be at my desk all week. She wasn't due back until Friday. I had 3 days to figure out what the hell was happening. On the plane, I kept checking my phone compulsively, terrified she'd somehow know I was following her, that she'd call and ask why my location showed I was traveling. But nothing happened. The flight attendant brought me coffee I couldn't drink. The man next to me complained about the legroom while I stared out the window, watching clouds pass below us, thinking about how you can live with someone and not know them at all. When we landed in Portland, it was raining, a steady gray drizzle that matched my mood perfectly. I picked up a rental car, plugged the Beaverton address into my GPS, and started driving toward the truth. The house looked exactly like the listing photos. Blue door, craftsman style, a small but well-maintained front lawn with a bird bath. A silver Toyota sat in the driveway. I parked 3 houses down, slumping in my seat like some kind of deranged private investigator in a bad movie. It was 11:30 on a Thursday morning. If Diana was here, she should be at work, right? At the supposed client office? Unless that was bullshit too. I sat there for 20 minutes, gathering courage, before I saw the front door open. A boy came out, maybe 7 or 8, wearing a backpack, followed by Diana. She was smiling, crouched down to zip his jacket. My vision actually tunneled. Everything went quiet except for the sound of my own breathing. She kissed the top of his head, said something that made him laugh, then walked him to the end of the driveway where a school bus was pulling up. She waved as he got on, stood there until the bus drove away, then turned and went back inside the house, closing that blue door behind her. I sat in that rental car and completely fell apart. I'm talking full body shaking, couldn't catch my breath, the kind of crying where no sound comes out at first. Everything I thought I knew had just evaporated. Diana had a child, a whole child who called her mommy, who she waved goodbye to before school, who lived in a house she owned 3 states away from the life we'd built together. I thought about our conversations about having kids someday, her saying she wasn't ready, needed to focus on her career. Meanwhile, she was packing lunches and zipping jackets for a kid I didn't know existed. The betrayal was so massive it felt abstract, like trying to comprehend the size of the ocean. Eventually, I pulled myself together enough to start the car. I drove to a coffee shop, ordered something I didn't drink, and tried to figure out what the hell to do with this information. Confronting her directly felt stupid. She'd been lying for years. She'd just lie more. I needed proof, documentation. I needed to understand the full scope of what she'd been hiding. That's when I did something that would have seemed insane 48 hours earlier. I hired a private investigator. I found one through a Google search, some guy named Thomas Brennan who had a decent website and 20 years of experience. His office was in downtown Portland, a narrow building near the river. When I walked in, he was eating a sandwich at his desk, a man in his 50s with gray hair and reading glasses. I need to know everything about someone, I told him without preamble. My wife. She's been lying to me. He looked at me for a long moment, probably cataloging my unwashed hair, my rumpled clothes, the manic energy coming off me in waves. Then he pushed the other chair toward me with his foot. Sit down, he said. Tell me the whole story. So I did. The birthday card, the Portland house, the kid at the school bus. He took notes, nodding occasionally, his expression neutral. When I finished, he was quiet for a minute. Then, this is more common than you'd think. Not a double life exactly, but people compartmentalizing in destructive ways. The question is, what you want to do with the information once we get it. Thomas Brennan moved fast. Within 24 hours, he had preliminary findings that made my stomach hurt. Diana, or the woman I knew as Diana, owned the Portland house under her legal name, Diana Catherine Merchant. But she also co-owned it with someone, a man named Alexander Grayson. Property records showed they'd purchased it together 4 years ago. Thomas pulled Alexander's information. 39 years old, worked as an architect at a firm in downtown Portland, had a clean record, seemed by all accounts like a normal guy. The kid I'd seen was Oliver Grayson, age 7, enrolled at a public elementary school in Beaverton. Birth certificate listed Diana as mother, Alexander as father. Oliver's date of birth was 3 years before Diana and I got married, which meant she'd been pregnant when we first met at that wedding. She'd been showing up to our early dates with a whole infant at home in Portland. The timeline made me physically ill. I'd been a placeholder, an alternate life she maintained while her real family existed 3 states away. There's more, Thomas said, sliding another document across his desk. It was a marriage certificate. Diana Catherine Merchant had married Alexander Grayson 7 years ago in a small ceremony in Portland, legally married, which meant her marriage to me was invalid, bigamy, a felony. I stared at the certificate, at their signatures, at the date. 7 years. She'd been married to him for 3 years before we even met. So what am I? I asked, my voice sounding distant and strange. Am I even really her husband? Thomas grimaced. Technically. No. Your marriage would be void. She can't legally marry 2 people. He paused, clearly trying to find a kind way to phrase it. You're the other family. That hit me like cold water. I wasn't the betrayed husband discovering his wife's secret. I was the secret. I was the person she was cheating with, except I hadn't known I was complicit. Every time she'd gone to Portland for work, she'd been going home. To her real home, her real husband, her real kid. I was the lie she told them when she disappeared for days at a time. I spent that night in a cheap motel near the airport, lying in bed with all the documents Thomas had pulled spread around me like evidence at a crime scene. I couldn't process the magnitude of it. 4 years of my life had been someone's elaborate deception. I thought about every moment that now felt contaminated. Our wedding, which meant nothing legally. The apartment we shared, which she apparently paid for with money she also used to support her Portland house. The vacations we'd taken, squeezed between her work trips. How many times had she been texting Alexander while sitting next to me on the couch? How many times had Oliver asked where Mommy was while she was in bed with me? I wanted to vomit. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just lay there, feeling something in my chest crack open, something that felt less like heartbreak and more like my entire sense of reality disintegrating. My phone buzzed. Diana texting goodnight, saying she loved me. I stared at those words until they stopped making sense. The next morning, I did something stupid. I went back to the house. Not to confront anyone, just to watch, to try to understand. I parked the rental car in the same spot, 3 houses down. At 7:30, Alexander came out in business casual clothes, got in the Toyota, and drove away, presumably to work. 15 minutes later, Diana came out with Oliver again, same routine. Jacket zipped, kiss on the head, school bus. But this time, after the bus left, she didn't go back inside immediately. She stood there, looking at her phone, and I realized she was probably texting me, sending some message about her boring client meeting or her hotel breakfast. The cognitive dissonance of watching her lie to me in real time while standing in her actual life made me feel insane. Then she went back inside. I sat there for 3 hours, watching the house, learning nothing except that suburban Portland life continued completely oblivious to the fact that it was destroying mine. At some point, I started laughing, a slightly unhinged sound that scared me enough to stop. I flew back home that afternoon, leaving Diana in Portland with her real family, none of them knowing I'd been watching. The flight back was a blur. I kept trying to plan what to say, how to confront this, whether to blow up her whole life or just walk away quietly. But underneath the anger and betrayal was something else. Grief. Grief for the relationship I thought we had. Grief for the future I'd imagined. Grief for the person I'd thought Diana was, who apparently didn't exist. When I got home, the apartment looked exactly the same but felt completely different, like a stage set. Nothing was real. Her coffee mug was still in the sink from before she'd left. Her clothes were in the closet. Photos of us were on the walls, smiling like idiots who didn't know one of them was living a double life. I walked through each room, cataloging what was hers, trying to figure out who I'd been living with. That night, Diana called from the hotel. "I'll be home tomorrow evening," she said brightly. "I can't wait to see you." I told her I couldn't wait either. And I meant it in a way. I couldn't wait to watch her face when she realized I knew everything. But I didn't confront her when she got home. I met her at the door, hugged her, acted normal. Some instinct told me to wait, to document more, to be absolutely sure before I detonated this. So for the next week, I played the role of oblivious husband while quietly gathering evidence. I went through her office at home, photographing documents. I checked her laptop when she was in the shower, finding encrypted files I couldn't access but screenshotting file names. I called Thomas Brennan and asked him to keep digging. Phone records, financial statements, anything that would prove the full extent of her deception. "What's the endgame here?" he asked. "Are you going to the police?" I hadn't thought that far ahead. Was this even a crime? Bigamy was illegal, sure, but did I want Diana arrested? Did I want to destroy Oliver's life by taking away his mother? The ethical dimensions were overwhelming. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just need to know everything first." Thomas said he'd have a full report within the week. In the meantime, I lived with a stranger wearing my wife's face. Diana must have sensed something was off because she kept asking if I was okay. "You seem distant," she said one night, curled up on the couch while we watched television. "Is it work?" I told her I was fine, just tired, dealing with a difficult project. She bought it because she wanted to, because acknowledging something was wrong would complicate the intricate juggling act she'd been maintaining for years. I wondered if Alexander ever asked her the same question when she came back from visiting me. If she told him she was tired too, blamed work stress, maintained the same careful performance. How did she keep it all straight? Did she have a system? Notes somewhere detailing which lies she'd told to whom? The logistics alone were staggering. 2 phones, 2 lives, 2 completely separate existences running parallel to each other with her as the only connection point. It must have been exhausting. Part of me, a small, twisted part, almost admired the competence required to pull it off for this long. Thomas Brennan's full report arrived on a Wednesday, delivered via encrypted email. It was 60 pages long, meticulously detailed, and absolutely damning. Diana had been living this double life from the very beginning, but the scope was bigger than I'd realized. She maintained separate bank accounts, separate social media under slightly different names, separate friend groups who never overlapped. Her corporate consulting job was Reala. She actually did work for that Portland firma, but it was part-time, flexible, designed specifically to give her cover for traveling. She'd structured her entire career around maintaining this deception. The financial records showed she'd been embezzling from our joint accounts, small amounts that I'd never noticed, to supplement her Portland household. Not enough to raise flags, just a few hundred here and there, adding up to tens of thousands over the years. She'd even filed separate tax returns, claiming married filing separately in Portland, single in our state. It was fraud on multiple levels: tax fraud, wire fraud, bigamy, identity fraud. Thomas had included contact information for a family law attorney and a criminal attorney. "You need legal counsel," he wrote in the email. "This is beyond relationship issues. This is criminal." I sat with that report for 3 days, rereading it obsessively, trying to find anything that might redeem Diana, some explanation that would make this something other than what it was. There was nothing. Every detail made it worse. She'd missed Oliver's 6th birthday because she was with me on a vacation I'd planned for our anniversary. She'd told Alexander I was a client, someone she had to entertain for business, which was why she was sometimes gone for days. She'd constructed two completely separate narratives, and neither of them was true. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I loved, was a fiction. A character she played when she was in this state, probably relieved when she could fly back to Portland and stop pretending. I wondered if she loved Alexander, if Oliver was planned or an accident, if her real life was in Portland and I was just some bizarre side project, or if she was equally invested in both. The psychology of it was beyond me. I couldn't even hate her cleanly because I couldn't understand her motivations well enough to form coherent anger. The attorney Thomas recommended was named Rebecca Lynn, a family law specialist with a reputation for handling complex cases. Her office was in a high-rise downtown, all glass and steel. When I arrived for the consultation, she was exactly what I needed: sharp, direct, unsentimental. I laid out the entire situation, showed her Thomas's report, watched her expression shift from professional interest to genuine shock. "This is one of the most elaborate deceptions I've encountered," she said, flipping through the documentation. "And I've seen a lot in 20 years of practice." She explained my options. I could pursue criminal charges for bigamy, which would likely result in Diana's arrest and prosecution. I could file for an annulment since our marriage was legally void. I could sue for fraud, both for the embezzled money and for emotional damages. Or I could walk away quietly, let her continue her double life, extract myself without detonating both families. "What do you want?" Rebecca asked, looking at me over her glasses. That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want? Revenge seemed hollow. Justice seemed complicated. Oliver would lose his mother, Alexander would be destroyed, and for what? Because Diana was a pathological liar? Because she'd decided she wanted 2 lives instead of choosing one? But letting her continue unpunished felt wrong too, like being complicit in the fraud. "I want her to face consequences," I said finally. "But I don't want to destroy an innocent kid's life." Rebecca nodded. "Then we go the strategic route. We document everything, we get law enforcement involved, but we push for a plea deal that minimizes trauma to the child. Diana will face charges, but probably probation rather than prison time if she cooperates. The other spouse, Alexander, he'll need to be informed. He's a victim in this too." The idea of Alexander as a victim was strange. In my mind, he'd been the real husband, the legitimate one, while I was the interloper. But Rebecca was right. He'd been lied to just as much as I had. Diana had betrayed both of us, systematically, for years. We were both her victims. That realization shifted something in my understanding of the situation. Rebecca connected me with a criminal attorney, a guy named James Kovacs, who specialized in white-collar crime and fraud cases. Together, they strategized how to approach this. The first step was notifying law enforcement in both states, bigamy and fraud charges where I lived, additional charges in Portland. But before we went to the police, Rebecca suggested something that made my blood run cold. We should inform Alexander first, give him the option to be part of the legal strategy rather than blindsided by it. The thought of calling this man, this stranger who was also Diana's husband, felt surreal. But Rebecca was right. He deserved to know. She offered to make the call, acting as my attorney, which felt slightly less insane than me doing it directly. We scheduled it for the next day. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, imagining how that conversation would go, how you even begin to tell someone their entire life is a lie. Rebecca made the call on speakerphone from her office. I sat across from her, listening to the ring, wondering if Alexander would even answer an unknown number. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" His voice was deeper than I expected, cautious. Rebecca introduced herself as an attorney calling regarding Diana Merchant. "Is she okay?" he asked immediately, alarm in his voice. "Has something happened?" Rebecca's tone was carefully neutral. "She's fine, Mr. Grayson, but I'm calling because information has come to light regarding her that you need to be aware of. Are you somewhere private where we can talk?" There was a pause. "I'm at work. Hold on." We heard movement, a door closing, then Alexander's voice again, tighter now. "Okay. What's going on?" Rebecca took a breath. "Mr. Grayson, I'm representing someone who has been in a relationship with Diana for the past 4 years. He recently discovered that Diana has been maintaining 2 separate households, one with you in Portland and one with him in another state. We have documentation showing that she married both of you, making her marriage to at least one of you legally void." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Alexander's voice, barely above a whisper. "What?" Rebecca gently repeated the information, offering to send him copies of the documentation. "That's impossible," Alexander said, his voice cracking. "Diana travels for work. She's a consultant. She has clients all over. Are you saying she's been—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I understand this is shocking," Rebecca said. "But we have extensive documentation. Property records, marriage certificates, financial statements. My client has also witnessed her in Portland with you and your son. We're calling because we believe you have a right to know before we proceed with legal action." Alexander started breathing hard, audibly panicking. "Oliver. Jesus Christ, Oliver. Does your client have kids with her? Rebecca glanced at me. No, I said quietly, speaking for the first time. No kids. There was another long silence. Then Alexander's voice, steadier now, edged with something that sounded like anger. I want to see everything. Send me everything you have. Rebecca emailed Alexander the full documentation that afternoon. He called back 2 hours later. I was still in her office, having nowhere else to be, nowhere else I wanted to face. This time, when Rebecca put him on speaker, Alexander's voice was completely different. Flat, hollow, like someone in shock. It's all real, he said. I looked her up. Your client. Found him on social media. There are pictures of them together going back years. She posted about their wedding, while she was married to me. He laughed, a bitter sound. I thought she was devoted to her career, supportive of her ambitions. I was proud of how hard she worked, how much she traveled. I'm such an idiot. You're not, Rebecca said firmly. You're a victim of an elaborate fraud. Both you and my client are. Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then, what happens now? Rebecca explained the legal strategy, coordinating with law enforcement, filing charges, documenting the full extent of Diana's deception. We'd like your cooperation, she said. The more evidence we have from both households, the stronger the case. Alexander agreed immediately. Whatever you need. I want her to face consequences for this. She built our entire life on lies. Oliver thinks he has a mother who loves him, and she's been His voice broke. How do I even explain this to him? Over the next week, Alexander and I became reluctant allies in documenting Diana's double life. We never spoke directly. Rebecca acted as intermediary, but we both provided evidence. Alexander sent photos, text messages, financial records from their joint accounts. He found love letters Diana had written him years ago, promising forever, describing their perfect family. Reading them made me sick because I had similar letters, nearly identical promises. She'd been telling both of us we were her soulmate, her future, the love of her life. The phrases were sometimes word for word the same, like she had a script she deployed in both households. It was pathological in its precision. Alexander also confirmed what I'd suspected. Diana had told him I was a client. She'd said I was demanding, high maintenance, required a lot of hand-holding. He'd seen it as evidence of her professional dedication. Every time she'd been with me, she'd been lying to him about business obligations. Every time she'd been with him, she'd been lying to me about work trips. Neither of us had been real to her. Detective Raymond Foster from the Fraud Division contacted me directly once the initial police reports were filed. He was a veteran investigator, 50-something with a weary face that suggested he'd seen everything. This is one of the stranger cases I've worked, he admitted when we met at the station. Most fraud is financial, but this is identity fraud, bigamy, emotional manipulation on a scale I haven't encountered. He was coordinating with Portland police, building a case that would span both jurisdictions. They were gathering evidence for charges of bigamy, wire fraud, because she'd transferred money across state lines, tax fraud, and identity theft. Detective Foster explained that Diana could face significant prison time if convicted on all counts. But given that there's a minor child involved and no violent crime, prosecutors might be willing to deal, especially if she cooperates. He looked at me carefully. How do you want this to play out? I'd thought about this constantly. I want her to admit what she did, to face legal consequences. But I don't want Oliver growing up without his mother if it can be avoided. He's innocent in this. Detective Foster nodded. We'll work with the prosecutors on both sides. See what we can arrange. The plan was to arrest Diana during one of her visits to me, rather than in Portland in front of Oliver. Detective Foster coordinated with Rebecca and James Kovacs. They decided on the following Thursday when Diana was scheduled to return from a work trip, which meant she'd been in Portland with Alexander and Oliver for 3 days. I was supposed to pick her up from the airport like normal, except this time, police would be waiting. The days leading up to it were surreal. I went to work, ate meals, went through the motions of normal life, while knowing that in less than a week, everything would explode. Diana called me every night from Portland, chatting about her day, asking about mine, maintaining the performance. I wondered if she had any sense that something was wrong, any instinct warning her that the elaborate structure she'd built was about to collapse. If she did, she didn't show it. She was exactly as she'd always been, charming, affectionate, convincingly in love with me. It made me question everything I thought I knew about human nature. Thursday arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made everything feel hyper-real. I drove to the airport in a daze, parked in the cell phone lot, and waited for Diana's text that she'd landed. Detective Foster and 2 other officers were already in position at the arrivals curb. The plan was simple. Diana would come out with her luggage, I'd pull up, and before she got in the car, they'd arrest her. No scene, no trauma, just a quiet apprehension in public where she couldn't run or react violently. My phone buzzed. Landed. See you in 20. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji, feeling like a traitor despite knowing I was the one who'd been betrayed. I pulled around to arrivals, scanning the crowd for her. There, rolling her carry-on, looking beautiful and tired in her travel clothes, smiling when she saw my car. She lifted her hand to wave. I watched Detective Foster step forward with his badge raised, watched Diana's expression shift from joy to confusion to dawning horror as she realized what was happening. The arrest happened quickly. Detective Foster identified himself, informed Diana she was being arrested for bigamy and fraud, began reading her rights. Diana's face went white. She looked at me through the windshield, and in that moment, I saw her understand that I knew. Everything. Her mouth formed my name, but no sound came out. An officer took her carry-on. Another gently turned her around to handcuff her. People were staring, filming on phones. Diana was still looking at me, her expression cycling through shock, denial, panic. I wanted to feel vindicated. Instead, I just felt hollow. She'd built this elaborate life, maintained it for years with meticulous care, and now it was ending in an airport parking garage while strangers posted videos to social media. As they led her to the patrol car, she finally looked away from me, her face crumpling. I sat in my car, watching them drive away, and realized I was shaking. It was done. The secret was out. Both our lives, all three of our lives, counting Alexander, were about to change irreversibly. I drove home in silence, feeling nothing and everything simultaneously. Diana was processed, booked, and held overnight before her arraignment. Rebecca called me with updates. Diana had immediately asked for an attorney, refused to make any statements without counsel present, seemed genuinely shocked that we'd discovered the truth. Bail was set at $50,000. Alexander refused to post it, which meant Diana sat in jail unless she could arrange it another way. "She's going to try calling you," Rebecca warned. "Don't take the call. Anything she says can be used in both the criminal case and your annulment proceedings." But Diana didn't call me. According to Rebecca, she called her parents, who were apparently horrified and confused, unaware that their daughter had been living a double life. They posted bail but made it clear they weren't supporting her through this. "They want her to plead guilty and face consequences," Rebecca reported. "They're furious." The news had also reached Portland. Alexander had told Diana's employer, who immediately placed her on indefinite leave, pending an internal investigation into whether she'd defrauded the company. Her carefully constructed professional life was unraveling as fast as her personal one. The media got hold of the story within 48 hours. Someone at the jail must have leaked it because suddenly my phone was flooded with calls from local news stations asking for interviews. "Woman arrested for maintaining secret double life" ran as a headline on 3 different news sites. The details were salacious enough that it went viral quickly. Successful consultant, 2 husbands in different states, years of deception, young child involved. Comment sections filled with speculation and judgment. People called Diana a sociopath, a monster, a liar. Others pointed out that she'd maintained 2 full-time relationships without either of us noticing, which required a level of competence that was almost impressive in its awfulness. I read the comments obsessively, looking for something that would help me understand why she'd done this. The theories ranged from mental illness to simple greed to childhood trauma manifesting as compulsive lying. None of it felt satisfying. Diana remained an enigma even as her secrets were laid bare for public consumption. Alexander called me directly for the first time a week after Diana's arrest. Rebecca had given him my number with my permission. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been crying or yelling or both. "I need to ask you something," he said without preamble. "Did you love her?" I thought about that question, about the woman I'd loved versus the woman who actually existed. "I loved who I thought she was," I said carefully. "I don't know if that person ever really existed." Alexander made a sound that might have been agreement or grief. "She told me you were a client, that you were needy, that entertaining you was exhausting but necessary for her career. I felt bad for her, having to deal with you." He laughed bitterly. "Meanwhile, she was sleeping in your bed, wearing your ring, playing house while I watched our son alone for days at a time." We were both quiet, processing the parallel betrayals. "What are you going to tell Oliver?" I asked finally. Alexander's voice cracked. "I don't know. How do I explain that his mother is in jail for living a double life? He's 7. He keeps asking when she's coming home." The legal proceedings moved forward with the grim efficiency of bureaucracy. Diana's attorney negotiated a plea deal. She would plead guilty to bigamy, wire fraud, and tax evasion in exchange for a reduced sentence of 5 years probation, mandatory psychological evaluation and treatment, and full financial restitution to both me and Alexander for the money she'd embezzled. No jail time beyond what she'd already served, contingent on her cooperation and continued treatment. James Kovach explained that this was likely the best outcome we'd get, given Oliver's circumstances. "The court wants to minimize trauma to the child. Long prison sentence would devastate him, and ultimately what would it accomplish? She's not dangerous. She's a compulsive liar, but not violent." I agreed to the plea deal. Alexander was harder to convince. He wanted her to suffer more substantially, but eventually accepted it for Oliver's sake. Diana's marriage to Alexander was her legal one since it came first. My marriage was annulled retroactively, declared void from the beginning. Legally, I'd never been married at all. The day Diana formally entered her guilty plea, both Alexander and I were in the courtroom. It was the first time we'd been in the same physical space. He was taller than I expected, with dark hair going gray at the temples, dressed in a suit like he'd come from work. We made eye contact briefly, sharing a look of mutual wreckage. Then Diana was brought in, wearing orange jail scrubs, looking smaller somehow without her usual armor of professional clothes and perfect makeup. Her eyes found me first, then Alexander. I watched her face crumble when she saw us sitting together, united in our victimhood. The judge asked if she understood the charges. Diana's voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. And how do you plead? Guilty. The word hung in the courtroom. Guilty. She was guilty of destroying 3 lives, our 4, counting Oliver, with her systematic deception. The judge accepted the plea, outlined the terms of her probation, and set a date for the formal sentencing hearing where victim impact statements would be heard. Diana was let out without looking back at either of us. Writing victim impact statements was harder than I expected. How do you summarize the devastation of discovering your entire relationship was a lie? I went through dozens of drafts, trying to articulate the specific ways Diana's actions had damaged me. The financial loss was quantifiable. She'd embezzled $32,000 from our joint accounts over 4 years. But the emotional damage was harder to put into words. I'd lost my ability to trust my own judgment. Every relationship decision I'd made felt tainted. I'd introduced Diana to my family, my friends. They'd all believed in us, in our marriage, in the future we supposedly had together. Now I had to tell them it was all fiction. I had to admit I'd been completely fooled. The shame of that, the humiliation of being so thoroughly deceived, was almost worse than the betrayal itself. In my statement, I wrote, Diana didn't just lie to me. She constructed an alternate reality so convincing that I never questioned it. She made me doubt my own perceptions and instincts. The person I trusted most in the world was the person I should have trusted least. Alexander's victim impact statement was read aloud at the sentencing hearing, since he couldn't be there in person. He was home with Oliver, who'd been told his mother was sick and needed to be away for treatment. Alexander's statement focused on the damage to Oliver. My son asks every day when his mother is coming home. He doesn't understand why she's gone. I can't tell him the truth, that she was never fully present to begin with, that half her life was a lie, that his family was never what he thought it was. He's 7 years old. He deserves a mother who chose him completely, not someone who treated him as part of an elaborate deception. Diana's actions have stolen his childhood innocence and sense of security. The courtroom was silent as the clerk read it. Diana was crying silently, her attorney's hand on her shoulder. When it was my turn, I read my statement directly, looking at Diana the entire time. I wanted her to see what she'd done to me, wanted her to sit with the weight of her choices. When I finished, she whispered something I couldn't hear. Her attorney leaned in, listened, then addressed the judge. Ms. Merchant would like to make a statement if the court permits. Diana stood, shaking visibly. The judge nodded permission. Diana took a breath, then spoke directly to me and, by extension, to Alexander, since he'd never hear this otherwise. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What I did was inexcusable. I convinced myself I could make everyone happy, be everything to everyone, and instead, I destroyed multiple lives, including my own son's. Her voice broke. I love Oliver more than anything. I loved her. She glanced at me, then away. I cared about both of you. But I was too cowardly to choose, too selfish to give up either life. I told myself the lies would be worth it if I could just maintain everything. Obviously, that was insane. Delusional. She wiped her eyes. I've been ordered into therapy. I'm starting to understand the psychological mechanisms that let me justify this for so long. Compartmentalization, rationalization, cognitive dissonance. But understanding doesn't undo the damage. I broke my son's family. I stole years of your lives. I'm sorry. It was inadequate. Apologies always are. But there was something in her voice. Genuine remorse, maybe. Or just the realization that consequences were finally real, that made it land differently than I expected. The judge sentenced Diana to the agreed-upon terms: 5 years probation, mandatory therapy, financial restitution, and a psychological evaluation to be repeated annually. She was also required to maintain steady employment and prohibited from traveling without permission from her probation officer. The judge added one condition that hadn't been in the plea deal. Diana was required to write a detailed account of how she'd maintained the deception, to be used by law enforcement and mental health professionals as a case study. Your methodical deceit is unusual enough that it warrants study, the judge said. Perhaps understanding your process will help identify similar patterns in others before they cause this level of damage. Diana nodded numbly. She was released that day, on probation, forbidden from contacting me without court approval. She returned to Portland, to Alexander and Oliver, to try to rebuild whatever family structure could survive the revelation of her lies. I flew home alone, to an apartment full of her things that I'd have to sort through and dispose of, to a life that needed complete reconstruction. The first few months after Diana's sentencing were dissociative. I moved through days without really being present, going to work, seeing friends, doing all the normal activities while feeling fundamentally disconnected from everything. I started therapy with someone who specialized in trauma related to betrayal. Dr. Stephanie Chen, a clinical psychologist with 15 years of experience, helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a kind of complex grief. I wasn't just mourning the relationship, but my entire sense of reality. You've lost your epistemic security, she explained. Your ability to trust what you know. Diana's deception was so complete that it's made you doubt your own perceptions. That's incredibly destabilizing. She was right. I second-guessed everything now. Replayed conversations looking for lies I'd missed. Questioned the motivations of everyone around me. It was exhausting and isolating. Dr. Chen worked with me on rebuilding that sense of security incrementally, learning to trust my judgment again without becoming paranoid. Alexander and I stayed in occasional contact, bonding over our shared experience in a way that felt both necessary and deeply strange. He sent updates about Oliver, who was struggling with Diana's limited presence, but seemed resilient in the way kids sometimes are. Alexander had started therapy too, and was considering whether to divorce Diana or try to salvage something for Oliver's sake. Part of me wants to just walk away, he admitted during one phone call. Start over completely, raise Oliver as a single dad, never speak to her again. But another part wonders if she's sick somehow, if this is something that could be treated. I understood the impulse to pathologize Diana's behavior, to make it a medical issue rather than a moral failure. It was easier to forgive illness than malice. But I wasn't sure Diana was sick in a clinical sense. She'd been too methodical, too careful, too successful at maintaining the lie. That required lucidity, not delusion. Maybe she's just someone who wanted two lives and figured out how to have them, I said. Maybe there's no deeper explanation. Alexander was quiet. That's scarier somehow, that she made a conscious choice to do this. 6 months after the arrest, Diana's court-ordered case study was completed and released to the relevant agencies. Rebecca sent me a copy. It was 50 pages of Diana explaining her methodology in clinical detail, how she'd established separate identities, maintained separate finances, coordinated her schedules, kept the lies consistent across years. She'd used encrypted apps for communication, maintained separate social media accounts with privacy settings that prevented cross-contamination, and structured her work to legitimize constant travel. She'd even consulted articles about maintaining long-distance relationships to optimize her time management. The level of planning was staggering. In her psychological evaluation, Diana was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. Essentially, she lacked empathy for how her actions affected others and prioritized her own desires above all else. But she wasn't technically a psychopath. She could feel guilt and remorse, as evidenced by her breakdown during sentencing. She just had a remarkable ability to compartmentalize those feelings until confronted with consequences. The financial restitution came through in installments. Diana sold the Portland house. Alexander had moved out, filing for divorce and getting primary custody of Oliver, with Diana limited to supervised visitation until Oliver's therapist deemed otherwise appropriate. She rented a small apartment, got a job doing basic consulting work at a much lower level than before, and devoted most of her income to paying back what she'd embezzled. I received a check for $32,000 plus interest. It felt meaningless. I donated most of it to organizations supporting victims of fraud. Money couldn't undo what she'd done. Alexander did the same with his restitution. We'd both lost something more fundamental than finances. We'd lost years of our lives to someone's elaborate lie, and no amount of money could buy that back. But the gesture felt important somehow, converting her betrayal into something that might help someone else, transmuting damage into support for other people navigating similar devastation. A year after Diana's arrest, I was doing better. Not good, but better. I'd started dating again, cautiously, with a level of suspicion that probably wasn't healthy, but felt necessary. I'd learned to trust myself in small increments, making decisions and honoring my instincts even when doubt crept in. Dr. Chen said I was making progress. The nightmares about discovering additional lies had mostly stopped. I could go days without thinking about Diana, which felt like victory. Then one afternoon, I got an email. From Diana. She'd gotten permission from her probation officer to send it, supervised by her therapist. The subject line read, "Not asking for forgiveness, just offering truth." Against my better judgment, I opened it. "I know I don't have the right to contact you," she wrote, "but my therapist suggested I write this as part of my treatment. You don't have to read it or respond. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know some truths that might help you move forward." Diana's email was long, detailed, and unexpectedly honest. She explained that she'd started the double life by accident BUI. She'd met me right after Oliver was born, when she was struggling with postpartum depression and feeling trapped in Portland. I'd represented escape, a version of herself that wasn't just a mother and wife. What started as an affair became something more when I'd proposed, and she hadn't been able to walk away from either life. "I kept thinking I'd choose eventually," she wrote, "that one relationship would naturally fade, or that I'd find the courage to end things with one of you. But both lives felt essential. You made me feel like the person I was before motherhood, ambitious, independent, desired. Alexander and Oliver gave me stability and purpose. I told myself I could manage both. That it was temporary. But temporary became permanent. And before I knew it, I was in too deep to confess without destroying everything." She wasn't making excuses, she clarified, just explaining the psychology that had let her justify the unjustifiable. She ended with, "You deserved better. You deserved someone who chose you completely. I'm sorry I wasn't capable of that." I read the email 3 times, then forwarded it to Dr. Chen and to Rebecca for their perspectives. Dr. Chen thought it showed genuine insight and accountability, which was rare in people with Diana's diagnosis. "She's done real work in therapy," Dr. Chen said. "Whether that makes any difference to you is entirely your choice." Rebecca was more cynical. "She's trying to manage her narrative, make herself sympathetic. Don't let this pull you back into her orbit." Both perspectives were valid. I decided not to respond to Diana, but did allow myself some closure from reading her explanation. It didn't change what she'd done or excuse it, but it gave me a framework for understanding that felt less like I'd been duped by a complete sociopath and more like I'd been caught in the blast radius of someone's unmanaged mental illness and selfishness. That distinction mattered for my healing. I could forgive myself for loving someone who'd seemed real, even if the relationship itself had been fiction. 2 years post-arrest, I ran into Diana completely by accident. I was in Portland for a work conference, walking to a restaurant, when I saw her across the street. She was with Oliver, holding his hand, both of them eating ice cream. She looked older, tired, smaller somehow without the polish she'd maintained during our relationship. Oliver was chattering about something, and she was listening with apparent focus. For a moment, I stood frozen, watching this woman who'd destroyed my life going about normal parenting activities. Then she looked up and saw me. Our eyes met across the distance. I saw recognition, regret, fear flash across her face. Oliver tugged her hand, pointing at a dog, oblivious to the silent exchange happening above his head. Diana said something to him, then looked back at me. She didn't smile or wave or acknowledge me beyond that look. Neither did I. After a moment, I turned and continued walking to the restaurant. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't anger anymore either. It was just acknowledgement that we'd both survived her choices, and we were each building different futures from the wreckage. Looking back now, 3 years later, the whole experience feels like something that happened to a different person. I'm dating someone new, someone patient, and understanding about my trust issues. I've rebuilt my life into something that feels authentically mine, rather than a stage set someone else designed. Alexander and I still exchange occasional emails. He eventually divorced Diana and has primary custody of Oliver, who's doing well in therapy and seems to have weathered the disruption better than expected. Diana completed her probation successfully and has apparently maintained her treatment, though I don't follow her life closely anymore. The case study she wrote has been used in several forensic psychology papers about deception and identity compartmentalization, which gives the whole nightmare some small educational value. Sometimes I still wonder what she was thinking during all those years, how she managed the cognitive dissonance, whether she ever truly loved either of us. But mostly I've accepted that I'll never fully understand. Some betrayals are too profound to make sense of. The story became minor internet legend, one of those cautionary tales that gets shared in Reddit threads about relationships gone wrong. People use it as a warning about red flags in relationships, about the importance of trust but verify, about how even the most seemingly normal person might be hiding something incomprehensible. I've made peace with being part of that narrative, with being the guy whose wife had a secret family. It's not how I'd have chosen to be known, but it's taught me something valuable about resilience and the strange ways trauma can reshape you into someone stronger. I don't regret loving Diana, even knowing now that the relationship was built on lies. I learned what I'm capable of surviving. I learned that you can have your entire reality shattered and still rebuild something worth living. That's not nothing. And if sharing this story helps someone else recognize the signs of systematic deception before it destroys them the way it destroyed me, then maybe this whole nightmare serves some purpose beyond my personal devastation. That's what I tell myself anyway, when the memories resurface uninvited. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.